Hi, I'm Gayla. After 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder, I took the leap and started my own business to pursue my dream of creating a work-from-anywhere lifestyle. Having the freedom to work from practically anywhere is such a cool feeling. You're in the right place if you're looking for ideas and inspiration to start and grow your own online business. Every week in this podcast, you'll receive practical ideas, hints, tips, and tricks to help you grow your online business where you can leverage your time and you can accomplish more. You too can experience wonderful adventure and freedom as you live life on your own terms. Hi there and welcome to today's show. I'm glad you're here because I thought I'd focus today on ideas you can use to repurpose your content. Why repurpose? Because not everyone digests content in the very same way. And much of the time, one piece of content leads us to another piece. And repurpose meaning using the same topic or basic idea or thought and carry it through in different places. Not copy verbatim and have the exact piece of content in many different places, but rather having the message in different formats or said in different ways in different places. In many previous episodes, I've discussed the importance of creating a core piece of content on a consistent basis, weekly preferably, but no less than monthly. The core piece of content is either the written word in the form of a blog, audio in the form of a podcast, or visual in form of a video. And this lays your foundation or your platform. You're most likely already creating your core piece of content. My hope is for today's episode to spark some ideas on how you can repurpose that core piece of content that you're already creating. Now, if you're struggling in becoming consistent in creating your blog or podcast or video, please do continue to listen. But don't be overwhelmed by all the ideas thinking of how you can do all of this stuff that I'm going to present all at once. Keep it simple and focus on your core idea. And then come back to this episode and layer in one of the repurposing ideas, one at a time until you have the habit. Now, these ideas I'm simply listing as suggestions and practices that either I do, my team does, or my clients and colleagues do. Everyone's specific strategy would be a bit different, and we just should try different things until we figure out what works best for us as individuals. What repurposing boils down to is capturing this one idea, this one topic in any given week or period of time and carry that idea in different forms in multiple ways. You see, your core content paints a picture of who you are and what you stand for. People get to know you from your core content, but sharing your ideas in different forms simply magnifies or amplifies your message and reinforces it. So let's dive right in as I share 5 ways that you can repurpose your content. First, social media. Well, this may be a no-brainer, but are you sharing your core piece of content on all your social channels? Maybe you're sharing a notice that you've published your latest blog or your podcast or your video, and that's just one post. That's one announcement. And most folks are posting that announcement post, but you don't have to just leave it at that. Are you sharing on all of your social channels in slightly different ways, more than once? You can create more than one post that points back to your blog, your podcast, or video and schedule it into the future. And they shouldn't be all announcements. Hey, this is my latest podcast. All those posts can draw from a different point from your core content. You can pull out different ideas or different concepts from that piece. You don't simply say, hey, this new blog is published. Draw out what you brought up in the blog post or in your podcast or your video. And just make a little snippet about it. Parsing out little bits of your topic or idea contained in your blog, your podcast, or your video, that's called micro content. It's a little bit of the whole picture. Social media is a more abbreviated version of your main topic. Your micro content, drawn from your core content, allows you to express yourself and your ideas. If you've been sharing your content on social, is there an opportunity to share just one more post? Maybe you can draw out a quote meme that you're quoting yourself from your core content. Use Canva to design yourself 2 or 3 different images that can be used in social. I was talking to a colleague of mine just the other day, and she publicizes her podcast. She's created a Facebook group and building a community around her podcast. And so she talks into that group when the latest episode has been published, and she draws information out of there. But she also has a Facebook business page. And we were talking, and she's like, I'm not really active right now in that Facebook business page. And as we were talking, I was like, well, can you go ahead and announce in your business page that your podcast has published? Maybe draw out one little piece of, or idea or concept and post it in not only her Facebook group, but on her Facebook business page in a slightly different way. Draw people to become part of that community. By doing this, you have the potential of having more eyes see that piece of content and be drawn to it. And you can say basically the same thing, maybe just in a slightly different voice or a different tone, or better said, a slightly different perspective. Think about this. Can you automate some of the posts? Are there opportunities to automate? And my friend and I were talking, I said, and we both use Libsyn for publishing our podcasts. And I talked to her and I said, did you know that you could connect several of your social accounts? I believe you can connect Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. But anyway, you can create slightly different posts and texts and schedule them right in Libsyn to publish those social posts at different times that make sense. And that can be automated so that you don't have to think about it after the podcast publishes. And that is just one more opportunity, not changing what she's doing, but adding to what she's doing, just to give another opportunity for eyeballs to see or to know about her podcast. Look into whatever platform you use for your core content. Whether it's WordPress for your blog, Libsyn for your podcast, whatever it is, do a little investigating to see if you can implement one little automation. Don't leave it to just one announcement for your core content. Use scheduling software like Buffer or Hootsuite, and even Facebook internal scheduling tool. Create and stagger posts that have the same idea as your weekly blog post, for example, or your weekly podcast. If you are posting twice about it, maybe add one more. Maybe add a different flair. It doesn't even have to point back, but it's an idea of what you believe in or what kind of message you're teaching, and you can stick that on social. So that's the first way that you can repurpose your content. See if you can add a post or two in addition to what you're already doing on social media. Number 2, how about your video or your podcast on your blog? If you're creating a consistent video, are you repurposing that? Where are you posting it to? For example, is your video a Facebook Live video? Well, then download it from Facebook and then upload your video to your YouTube account. Create a brief description or outline giving the gist of what you just talked about in the video. If you have several videos that you're talking about similar topics, consider adding like videos to a playlist. I tend to think of another word for playlist as a high-level category. And here's what's cool. Use your YouTube video to create a blog post on your website. Write up a summary of what the video covers. That's your blog post. It may be very brief, and it may be pretty close to the description that you put into YouTube. Create and format that blog and embed that video. Don't forget to add an image to the post, so when you share it on social, it'll bring over the image. Now, you not only have the live video on Facebook, you've got it onto YouTube, which is the second largest search engine. Then again, you have it on your blog. That's 3 times. You can share on social a post directing folks to all these, whether it's your blog post or your YouTube link, you have opportunities there. How about your podcasts? You can pull out snippets of audio and create an MP4 clip using something like a Headliner app to share on your social channels. It's a pretty cool tool, and it brings out a little bit of dimension from your podcast. It's got some imagery, it's got a snippet of your voice, and you can share it on social in different ways. You should be creating a blog post for each of your podcast episodes and embed the audio reader after you do the summary. Now, I always like to be able to create a blog post whenever I can, because you're able to direct folks to your website, and that becomes your central library. Anytime you can direct someone to your website, that's a good thing. Number 3, email. Are you emailing your list to direct them to your core content? Believe it or not, but this step is missed by more people than you may think. A lot of folks are afraid of emailing their list too often. Some are paralyzed as to what to say in an email. Well, if you're already creating your consistent core piece of content, simply drawing out a piece of the content written in a way that you're speaking to one individual, then pointing them to read more or listen or watch, depending on your content, give them a hyperlink that's easy to follow. How your email will take shape really does depend on your style and your audience. You may do a quick note to your list in a simple, plain text format, or you may design a monthly newsletter that will give a summary and excerpts of your newest content. Now, if you're building a personal brand, it does make sense that most of your emails will simply be text with very little formatting. Your email will feel more informal and personal. On the other hand, if you're building a business brand and your audience is more corporate-y, I don't know if that's a word, but corporate-y, we're going to go with that. A newsletter may be more images, it may have more links, and it would be more of curating your content that you've published over a period of time and have a high-level summary. It takes on a different shape. If something catches the reader's eye, they'll quickly click the link and get to the article or the podcast that they've missed. I subscribe to several different lists, and if I'm following somebody that's a personal brand, their emails are more informal and personal and plain text. I follow several businesses so that I can get their content, learn from them, and get updates on what they're up to. And those businesses, like Social Media Examiner, for example, they have a newsletter that highlights or summarizes real quick, just giving the title and maybe a quick little blurb about some of their latest content, because they're always producing content. And not always do I read every single article, but sometimes something catches my eye and I go right to that content. I want to know on a high level, kind of read the headlines to see what's going on. That's just one example. But a few of my clients have had difficulty staying consistent with their blog, with their core content. And what fit better for them is if they could kind of turn things upside down. They could commit and publish an email on a consistent basis for some reason. That fit better in their mindset than creating a blog post. So instead, we flipped their process upside down. Since they could commit to an email, they'd write up their email and have their idea in place, and then using that content would produce a blog post from that email idea. Like I said, for some reason, turning it upside down, it was just a mindset thing, but it got them consistent. And I talk about this more in episode 116, a super simple strategy to start a solid foundation of consistent content. So if you have trouble with a consistent blog, maybe try developing a publishing schedule for an email. You can download the checklist to the whole process by going to scrivenersolutions.com/checklist. The next way to repurpose content. Number 4, backlinks to previous content. Over time, you will start developing quite the library of content. You'll be writing, speaking, or videoing similar topics. You'll have an overview of a topic of one post and then drill down and cover something specific in other posts. You may share something similar a year later, but have a different angle on that topic. What will happen is that you'll end up being able to mention a previous piece of content. Did you notice just a little bit ago that I referred to episode 116 and that checklist? That's previous content. In video or podcast, you may end up referring to a different piece of content that you've already created. Then, in the show notes or the description and the blog post where you embed either the video or the audio player, you would create the post where you would hyperlink to the content that you mentioned. It makes it super easy for the reader to follow the link if they want to learn more. And by the way, it helps with your SEO. And I'm not sure if anyone else thinks that backlinking is repurposing content, but I do, because in my mind, you are breathing new life into that older content. If you are referring to a post you did about 6 months ago or even a year ago that it's still really relevant, you can go back to the idea number 1 and share your post again on social with a fresh, creative way. What I like to do so that I can keep track of all of these posts, because my library is getting quite large, what I like to do is have a master list of all my blog posts that I have had published, my podcast episodes that have been published, and my videos. I have them in Airtable so that I can quickly look back and use it as an index to quickly glance at what I have that I can refer back to. I also use it to help me sometimes to come up with topics for current things to talk about. I used to use Excel before Airtable, but it doesn't really matter what tool you use as long as it works for you. But I mainly keep track of the dates, the titles, the topics, and the categories of that particular post. And I also like to include the link to get right to the blog post right on my website, because then I can just quickly link to it from my Airtable but I can quickly link to it and glimpse over or listen or whatever if I need to do research on my own stuff. I also have that hyperlink there because it's super easy just to copy and paste it right into the blog post if I need to. And finally, the fifth way that you could repurpose content are Zoom recordings to YouTube. The use of Zoom has exploded because of how the pandemic conditions right now have turned many work situations on its head. The internet airways are jam-packed with video calls. Now, depending on the context of your Zoom call, perhaps the content would be perfect to share on your YouTube channel. Or maybe a portion of the call would be very beneficial to your followers. Do you record your podcast interviews using Zoom? Well, then maybe it's time to use the video from the call and add it to YouTube as well. Perhaps you have a brainstorm session or a great discussion with a colleague about something in your niche. Well, you both could have content on your respective YouTube channels. You just need to figure out what works and makes sense for your brand. But once it's out on YouTube, remember to start with point number 1 and share it on social media. Then 2, add it to your blog. 3, email your list. Number 4, determine if there are backlink opportunities that you can use. Well, there you have it. How you can tap into the magic of repurposing your content. You may be doing many of these ideas I've suggested, and some ideas may not fit into your strategy, but I hope it had sparked some ideas for you to maybe go into a direction that you haven't thought of before. You may want to implement all of them, but are having the trouble finding the bandwidth to get all of it accomplished. For many businesses who repurpose like crazy, remember that it's not left to be done by one person, and it's certainly not left to be done by the owner of the business. Keep that in mind when you're trying to implement everything yourself. If you're a business of one and haven't started delegating yet, don't think you have to do it all. But take some of these ideas and ask yourself, is there at least one thing that you could add to repurpose your content? One more social post a week. Do you email your list? Do you download your Facebook Live video and add it to your YouTube channel? Is your podcast auto-posting to your social channels? Just adding one more way to repurpose is another means to add value to your followers and to make connections. As you begin to add to your team, many of the repurposing tasks can be delegated, leaving you to focus on your message and your core piece of content versus messing with all the details of distributing your message in every possible means. If you already have a team, I do hope today's episode has sparked some ideas where you and your team could add an opportunity of repurposing. Well, for that matter, team or no team, I hope you have come away with some ideas to help you use the same words, the same ideas from your core piece of content and just reuse them. Not to copy word for word, but reuse the ideas and concepts in other messages, in other forms. You can say the same thing in so many different ways and from so many different angles. Well, thanks for joining me today. And if you found this information helpful, I'd encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And what would be super helpful is if you would leave a review. I do know that takes time, and sometimes it's a pain depending on the podcast viewer, but your comments are greatly appreciated. Now be sure to check out the show notes for all the links and the resources that I've mentioned here. Until next time, have a fantastic week.